All right, welcome to The Journey, an interview series with our host, Mr. Michael Gartner, lifelong journalist. This is our third installment of The Journey. In the first one, we heard from the Bankers Trust president, Suku Radia, with such hard-hitting questions as boxers or briefs, of which we figured out what he wore. Second time, we heard from Laura Hollingsworth, president and publisher of the Des Moines Register. We found out she was the lead singer of a cover band in Seattle. That's where she met her husband. And this is the reason we do this. So often we see CEOs and presidents, we hear their resume, but we get to know very little about them personally and their unique and dynamic stories that made them who they are. And tonight, please give a round of applause for Mr. David Maxwell, the president of Drake University.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before we get started and throw it over to Mr. Gartner, I want to say thank you to a couple people in the room. Mr. Andrew Allen over here for Principal that gave us this beautiful facility. We're so thankful to have Principal Financial Group in the Downtown Chamber. Round of applause for Principal Financial Group and Andrew Allen, please. Thank you. And also, the Downtown Chamber is just one of 23 affiliate chambers that feed into the Greater Des Moines Partnership. The Greater Des Moines Partnership is an amazing organization, and that has a lot to do with a lady back there by the name of Martha Willits, who in January will be leaving this organization. And you've been very good to me, and this partnership and the Des Moines community is better off because of Martha Willits. So if we give a round of applause for Ms. Martha Willits. So I would love to give the biography of our host, Mr. Michael Gartner, but he won't let me. He's the most modest man in this room, I guarantee that. So all I'm supposed to say is, ladies and gentlemen, owner of the Iowa Cubs and lifelong journalist, Mr. Michael Gartner.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to have David Maxwell here this evening. David is really a Renaissance man. He's a scholar, he's a professor of literature, he's an expert in the Russian language, he speaks many languages. Although I must say, any of you who are going to submit questions in Bulgarian, he only reads Bulgarian, he doesn't speak it. So submit those questions in writing, and he'll be happy to answer them in English or French or German or Russian. He is as the president of Drake University, and various things he's done will probably come out during the course of the evening. But my first question, David, is in 1962, you were the band boy for the Benny Goodman Band as it toured Russia. And my question is, I have a twofold question. What's a band boy? And second of all, has it been all downhill since then?
Thank you. It's been great being here this evening. You should know this because the band boy is the musical equivalent of a bat boy. You set up the music stands, you put the music out, make sure everything's ready for rehearsals, make sure everything's ready for the performance. And the reason I did that is that this was kind of an all-star band that the State Department put together. Benny was already old.
With an all-star band boy as well?
Absolutely. Benny was already old, and he was probably younger than I am now, but from the vantage point of a 17-year-old, he was old. And the State Department put together this all-star band of a whole bunch of the young stars, Zoot Sims and Phil Woods and Jerry Dodgen and others, and a few of the guys who had played with Benny back in the late 30s and 40s, including my father as the first trumpet player. And my father had a policy of not traveling unless he could take at least one member of his family. It was actually my sister's turn to go on a trip, but fortunately she needed eye surgery. So I went, and in those days, you couldn't just go to the Soviet Union, and you had to have a reason to get the visa. So I was hired as the band boy for the band. And it was a trip that literally determined my career. I came back from that trip and—
Saying I won't be a musician?
Well, my lack of talent had already determined that, but—
Came back what?
I came back from the trip. There was a man who traveled with us from the embassy. He was the cultural affairs officer named Terry Catherman. And I spent a lot of time with Terry because in rehearsal you just sit there hearing the same thing every
Excuse me for a minute, but how old were you?
17.
Okay.
And I was fascinated with what he did. It was the middle of the Cold War, and Kennedy and Khrushchev are threatening each other with bombs and missiles. And here's Terry Catherman sending the Bolshoi to New York and bring the Benny Goodman Band to the Soviet Union. This was the first American jazz band behind the Iron Curtain. It was a big deal. And we had Time Magazine, New York Times, Life Magazine, all these correspondents following us. So I got back from the trip and went off to Grinnell as a freshman, and I sent Terry a letter that said, if I want to be you, what should I study? And got this wonderful response from him that was basically the liberal arts message: study everything you can, you never know what you have to deal with in this job. But I became a Russian area studies major at Grinnell initially because I wanted to be Terry Catherman.
And you wanted to be Terry Catherman because you got to go to Russia because your father insisted he had to have a companion, and but for your sister's eye surgery, you today would be a dentist in Erie, Pennsylvania.
Possibly, yeah. Actually, Park Avenue, our family dentist was trying to get me to take over his practice when I went to college, and I couldn't imagine doing that. So.
That's that's an amazing story. So now the other day you gave a talk, a commencement talk in May to your students, and this is one paragraph. You said you have much more of your life. The reason I say this is a lot of the people here are young people, and they're all young at heart, but they're wondering about their own careers, how you do things, how you make decisions. You know, how much you plan for, how much is luck, how much just comes along, and how do you make these decisions? And you have a wonderful paragraph here. You said you have he's talking to the graduates of Drake in May. You have much more of your life ahead of you than behind you. I have more of my life behind me than ahead of me. And I can tell you that when I look back, I do not measure it by job titles, salary, or prestige. My metric is whether or not it mattered that I was here, that I wasn't just a 97-year waste of molecules. First of all, what makes you think you're going to live to be 97?
This is actually a fact that terrifies Madeline. Most males on my father's side of the family live well into their 90s, and they're usually completely crazy for the last 10 or 15 years.
Have you started achieving either of those goals yet?
You'll have to ask her. I think I'm fine.
But Joe, but the thrust of the measure is of the message is, I do not measure my success or my happiness by job titles, salary, or prestige. It's whether or not it mattered that I was here. Mm-hmm. How do you measure whether or not it mattered that you were here?
That's a great question. I think for somebody in my profession, what I've done in my career, both as a college professor for full-time for 10 years, and I was at Tufts, as you know, for 18 years, and a full-time faculty member for 10 years, and then dean of the college for 8 years, but I still taught. And now as an administrator, I think there are two metrics, and the most important one in this role is the university better because I was here? Am I contributing? Am I one of the people who's in the university community who's contributing to making us better at keeping the promise? I mean, we promise our students an exceptional learning environment in our mission statement. So can I look at objectively over the 12 plus years that Maddie and I have been at Drake and say, okay, I think I can see ways in which I've helped make the university better. As a teacher and as a professor, the most heartwarming metric are the letters you get from former students who tell you in one way or another that you influenced, you were the Terry Catherman in their life, that they made choices or were able to do things because of their interaction with you.
But let's say I'm a young man or woman, and I'm starting out, and I'm working Principal or Nationwide or Viva or Wellmark or someplace, and I take your message to heart. Mm-hmm. How often do I run a check to see whether this is happening? I mean, when do you say, oh, it's not happening?
Yeah.
I mean, do you periodically say to yourself, am I contributing, or do you say, I'll check every 10 years? I mean, how do you do it? How do you decide whether
that's a terrific question. I think
that's two.
So I guess it's happening, isn't it? I'm getting into my 90s, right? I think I think in some ways you ask the question every day. It's just the magnitude of the answer gets bigger as you look at bigger time frames. But
And what if the answer is no?
then you do better tomorrow.
I mean, do you say, I'm in the wrong job? I mean, for instance, you were a teacher, you were a teacher, and then you were an administrator at Tufts, and then you were a college president,
Yeah,
and then you went into something entirely different,
right.
and then you became a college president again.
Recidivist.
And in that, yeah. Yeah.
Slid back.
Do you, did you say to yourself in this other job where you're running basically an industry organization?
No, it was a think tank.
A think tank,
Yeah.
same thing. And just an industry organization for thinkers.
Yeah.
That this isn't what I want to do?
No, I think that I was director of the National Foreign Language Center, which
Right.
is a public policy center created by the Ford and Mellon Foundations to try to find public policy ways to improve America's linguistic and cultural myopia. So no, there were really interesting metrics to measure there. I mean, you could really look and see. We briefed Congress on national language needs. Unfortunately, it was the 104th Congress, so it was kind of a wasted effort. But this is going on the radio, right?
That's okay.
Sorry. Newt was there. But we had an impact on campuses around the country. We had an impact on schools around the country. We had an impact on the ways we did a study for the Department of Education on how they spent Title VI dollars, which are their international programs dollars, and they changed the way they funded things to make them more effective. So it was a different way of, I think behind your question is a really interesting question, and that is, does your job have to answer that question? And are there other ways in which you leave those tracks?
And what's the answer to that question?
I think my answer is I'm really lucky in that there isn't much difference, as Madeline will tell you, between my job and my life. But that I'm really fortunate that my jobs have provided me the opportunity to do that. And if you're really fortunate, I think you're in a job in which you're able to notice that you've had a positive impact, that things are better. But there are all kinds of other ways to being involved in the community, mentoring. You know all the ways. There are ways outside of your job. You're really lucky when your job enables you to do it too.
But your job and your life are the same. You go over to your house, as often as not, there's Drake students in there tripping over the dogs and the cats. And just everybody seems to make themselves at home, come and go. And on weekends, you're off doing things for Drake. So you don't need a balance since it's all one? I mean, how does that work?
Boy, I wish I didn't have to answer this in front of Madeline.
We'll let her
Yeah,
have a
you may want to ask
word.
her opinion of this. I think, well, first of all, because we'd done this before at a much smaller institution, a small liberal arts college, that we knew when we came to Drake, we knew what it was, that you can't do this well without living it. It's not really a job, it's a life. But at the same time, you find ways to step out of it. Personally, I do it by running almost every morning. I get an hour of vacation every day, not talking to anybody and listening to music. Maddie and I escape to Maine in the summer. We try to do things, not very successfully, ourselves. One of the great things, advantages this time around, is when we were at Whitman, our kids were teenagers, and they're in their 30s now somehow, and we adopted them when we were 6, and they will tell you what a rotten father I was when I was a college president. But now with the kids out of the house, most of the things I do for Drake that aren't in the office, Maddie and I do together. So she's half the team, so we get to spend a lot of time trying to keep each other sane in it. But it is hard in this kind of job to differentiate between your job and your life. The good part of it is that a lot of parts of my job, I'll give you a concrete example. Sandy Hetfield Club, our wonderful athletic director, her first fall here, we were at a Drake football game, and we were walking out of the game, and I was walking with Jeff, her husband, and it was homecoming weekend, and the Francis Marion Drake dinner, as you know, is the big dinner for the generous donors at Drake, And Jeff said, so is this is Saturday afternoon? He said, so is this it? Are you done for the day? And I laughed. I said, are you kidding? I have to go home and take a shower and get in a tuxedo and go off to the Francis Marion Drake dinner. And he said, my God. He said, do you ever have any downtime? And I said, look at it differently, Jeff. I said, we're just coming out of a football game, right? And he said, yeah. And I said, I was at work. People paid to get in there. You know, this is...
I don't understand that concept of sports. People coming in to pay to get into it, to watch a sports thing and people at work.
Yeah, I can give you some pointers on that. But it's... So, you know, one of the really wonderful things about a job that really consumes so much of your life is that one of the responsibilities that Maddie and I have is going to lectures and concerts and recitals and sporting events and traveling around the country and doing things that people want to do for fun. And we do it, and it is fun, but it's part of the job. So I think that helps with the balance as well.
Let me change the subject for a minute. You grew up in the East Coast.
Yep.
You came to Grinnell College. First of all, why?
My mother had 3 older brothers, and the oldest was the chair of the NYU music department for years and the self-appointed arbiter of my academic career. In the fall of my senior year in high school, back in those days, you didn't think about where you're going to go to college until the fall of your senior year in high school. Now people do it in 8th and 9th grade. And we send them materials.
In crayon?
Yes, right. And he called me up and he said, David, there's this little college in Iowa everybody's saying is the best damn college in the country. I want you to go take a look at it. So I got on a plane and flew to Chicago, and I flew an Ozark Airlines DC-3 to Des Moines. And somebody from
Probably
Grinnell,
not nonstop.
Yeah, right. They had to refuel several times. And then somebody picked me up at Des Moines Airport and drove me back into the 1950s. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it.
What year was this?
This was the fall. This is November of '61. I was 16 years old. And I absolutely loved it, obviously. And they treated me wonderfully. I have no idea why. It was homecoming weekend. My date for the homecoming dance was the homecoming queen because her boyfriend was in law school. So they, you know, and she was 6 years older than I was. I mean, she treated me like a puppy and was, you know, and she was wonderful. And I mean, I was ready to just call home and say, send my stuff, I'm staying here. It was perfect.
And then you graduated, and you went to graduate school, and you got your MA and your PhD, and you became a professor, and you basically forgot about Iowa. You went on, I mean, professionally at any rate. And then all of a sudden, 12 years ago, here you are at Drake, and you come back, and you're taking over an institution that is vitally important to the Des Moines area and central Iowa, as well as elsewhere in the nation, but particularly here, and an institution that sometimes is apart from the city. First of all, why did you do it? What did you think about coming back here? And how have you, and you've done this successfully, but how have you made it a part of the community? So now, both in terms of people no longer think of Drake as 13th grade or 14th grade or 15th grade. They no longer think of it as an outpost, and they no longer think of it as something with a great wall around it like Lausonomy was in the 1940s in Highland Park. How did you do it? Or it's fair to say, how did you and Maddie do it?
Well, I think there are a variety of things. And first of all, I do want to correct one impression, is that I didn't forget about Iowa. As Madeline had a wonderful comment when we were about to fly out here for our 3 days of Spanish Inquisition, when I was a finalist for the position, and Madeline said, well, first of all, she had to look on a map to see where Iowa was. She knew it was between Chicago and San Francisco.
But she knew about the potatoes.
She knew about the potatoes, yeah. But you know, when people in Iowa make fun of her for that, she's got a very good response. Maddie's from Maine, and she'll look at them and say, name the 6 contiguous states of New England. So regional provincialism prevails all over the place, right? But we're getting ready to go to the airport to fly out here, and Madeline says, now I finally get to see heaven. And I said, what? And she said, you've been talking about Iowa for 25 years. Now I get to finally see it. And it was sleeting and raining and sloppy, and it was February, and it was one of those days, and it was just really ugly. And 11 o'clock at night, Don Adams dropped us off at the Marriott, and Jack Ream was the chair of the board at the time, and so they put us up in the Meredith suite, where we were.
That's the one with the bathroom.
It's the one with not only with the bathroom, but the most unbelievably stocked bar you've ever seen. And I looked at this bar with more bottles than you've ever seen. I said, this is a test, and I don't know what the right answer is. So they're gonna, is he an uptight teetotaler or is he a drunk? And should we have a drink or not? And Madeline looks out the window at the top of 801 Grand, for some reason they had the floodlights on so you could see how incredibly grimy and slimy and wet and gray everything was. And Madeline looks at it and says, if you take this job, I'll leave you. And it didn't work. And then 3 days later, because of the people we interacted with here, as Don Adams was driving us to the airport, she says to him, you better give David this job because you've really made me like it here. and it really, so it was wonderful. I mean, it really was the people of Iowa. But
so then you're here.
We're here.
And what do you do? I mean, how do you solve these? How did you solve these problems? And they're solved.
The Drake problems.
Yeah.
It was
not the Maddie problem. That's a whole different issue.
Yeah, I'm still working on that. But it was 850 people committed to change. One of the really, Drake was struggling with a number of things in '99, but what that meant, it was easy to be on a white horse. Nobody was satisfied with the status quo. Everybody knew things had to change. You needed to, in a sense, be the lightning rod, the focal point to figure out, all right, where are we going to go and how are we going to get there and what is it that we need to do? So the first thing you do is listen. I spent 4 months making the rounds of every department on campus with a very set group of questions. What's good about Drake? What's bad about Drake? What needs to be fixed? What do we need to preserve? What do we need to cherish? What do we need to enhance? How can I help you do your job better? And I ended up with about 150 pages of notes. The only time I talked in these conversations, remarkably, was when I had to remind them of what the questions were. And then I came back about 4 months later to the whole campus community and said, okay, this is what I think I've been hearing from you. Am I right? And if I'm right, here's how I think we ought to go about it. And we launched something we call Program Review, which ultimately involved about 200 people on campus on various committees and task forces, students, faculty, staff, alums, board members.
And you turned out to be an agent for change.
I think it was maybe the right person in the right place at the right time. Yeah. I mean, people were waiting for change. They just didn't know what it looked like.
Yeah, uncertainty is worse than change.
Yeah.
And what happened then?
Well, as you said, I mean, we went from struggling to, all the metrics that you look at for institutional health. Drake had an interesting budget strategy in the 90s. It certainly wasn't deliberate, but it was declining enrollments and increasing costs. And so we needed to do something.
That won't work for the long term.
No, it's not a good long-term strategy. And it had a budget deficit, significant deferred maintenance issues, and all the morale problems that come along with that. The morale problems were relatively easy to deal with as soon as people realized they had ownership of what happened next, that things weren't happening to them, that they needed to do something, and people really bought into that. So by all those metrics, we've had a...
Okay, that's the university.
Yes.
What about the university and the town?
That was one of the first things I think it was the first week I was here. I was talking to somebody at Pioneer, and Tom Urban stuck his head in the door and to introduce himself and say hello. And he said, you have to do something about Drake's relationship with Des Moines.
Right.
And I was surprised. I was grateful he said that to me. But I was surprised because when I came in, half of Des Moines' business leadership was on the board of trustees. So why would there be be an issue. But I give Tom great credit for leaning in and telling the new kid how to do his job. I mean, he just said, this is something you need to look at. And I think a big part of it was getting involved personally, and there were wonderful people who opened the door for that. Bill Knapp and others. I ended up on the executive committee of the partnership about 6 weeks after I got here, and I can't imagine how I deserved that. I think Bill must have called somebody and said, do it, open the door. And I was really embraced by the people who were on that committee at that time.
But that's the business community.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to Des Moines than the business community. There's the baseball community,
we have a baseball community.
But there are these other communities, and the business community, you can have kind of a they're your trustees and everything, but it wasn't the business community that you had such a big disconnect from. It was the entire town, the neighborhoods, the politics, the schools. What did you do? How did you do it? And I asked that question because I think the same thing exists right now at Des Moines University, and they're going to have to kind of follow your template to do this. So what would you recommend to her, and what did you do?
Well, I think the pattern's the same. It's a lot of listening. Don Adams, who I suspect many people know, was the vice president for student affairs at Drake for a long time, and when I got to Drake was the executive assistant to the president, and he was our liaison with the Drake Neighborhood Association and several of the other neighborhood associations around. And so in the first year or so, I met regularly with all of those groups, asking the similar kinds of questions, but what do you need from Drake, and what is it that Drake's
What were the answers?
Some of it was access to what we do, access to cultural events, sporting events on campus. I think most of it really was harder to grab in a concrete sense. That it was, I think, the things you were referring to. They saw, they felt like the university had a wall around it, and that we weren't welcoming, and that we weren't committed to the neighborhood. We weren't committed to the vitality of the neighborhood, to the future of the neighborhood. And so we created, in addition to the Drake Neighborhood Association, we created an advisory council of people in the neighborhood, advisory to me, and I met with them for years and years. And I think one of the great signs is it eventually kind of atrophied because it wasn't needed anymore. They didn't feel that they needed to get my attention on a regular basis, that they could get the university's attention whenever they needed to. We also worked hard with the other people who wanted to get things done in the neighborhood. There were developers coming in, Larry James and his family, and others who wanted to do things in the neighborhood, and but needed Drake's help in one way or another to accomplish it. Even when the Walgreens came in on 30th First and University, the neighborhood felt very strongly that they wanted it to reflect the new urbanism architecture, not set back in the back of a parking lot, but up on the sidewalk and pedestrian friendly. And there was a property in the way of doing that, but we owned it, so we gave it to them in order to make that happen. So we worked.
Came back in spades, didn't it?
I think so. Well, they came back in trust.
Came back from money from Walgreens, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, that $10 million?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That was, yeah. Oh, that, yes. Yeah. So it was that kind of interaction when that whole development from 25th down University to 23rd, when that was, I'm sorry, from 24th to 23rd, there was a property there that was ours that we contributed so that they would be able to do that as well. The big Drake West Village, which I think a lot of people think are Drake-owned residence halls down on 30th and Forest. We don't own that. That's a collaboration with Hubble Realty and several other partners. So a lot of it was listening to the community and then responding in ways that people in the community could do what they wanted.
Partnerships. You just mentioned the partnership with Hubble, other partnerships. Nobody can do anything alone. What are the most important partnerships that you have forged since you've been at Drake? Either Drake, primarily that Drake has forged with your guidance, but that maybe that you personally have forged as well, that have made Drake a better place?
I do think to a great extent it is certainly the neighborhood's important, and the improvement in the neighborhood. When we got to Drake in '99, I was going to the office. I think I wasn't even official yet. I was here 2 weeks before I started, and I stopped at Friedrichs at 42nd and University early in the morning and got coffee, and a woman came up to me and said, "Aren't you the new president of Drake?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "It's such a wonderful school. It's too bad it's in such a terrible neighborhood." And I said, "It is?" And she said, "Oh, yeah, don't you know about the Drake neighborhood?" And I said, "What about the Drake?" And she said, "Oh, it's a terrible neighborhood." And I said, "You know, I grew up in New York. I lived in Boston for 18 years, and I've just spent 6 years in Washington." I said, "I haven't heard any gunshots yet. You know, I think it's a contextual thing. I think the neighborhood, it looks a little seedy in parts, but but I think to see what has happened, the transformation, the investment in the neighborhood by the people who live there, by other investors and people who've made things happen has been a tremendously important partnership. But I also think the partnership with the business leadership has been hugely important. A great example is the Drake Stadium project. We raised $15 million to make Drake and Des Moines the track and field capital of the Midwest, and Principal Financial Group was an early and major donor to that. The Polk County, Prairie Meadows, and Bill Knapp, Mid-American with Greg, and so there's really been, and I think the latest example is just wonderful. As you may have seen in the papers, the Principal Financial Group has just given us $2.5 million in support of our international education agenda. And that is a real partnership. It's not just a donation. We will be working with the folks at Principal to provide global internships for our students, and to take advantage of the folks that they're bringing in from around the world to have them on campus. So I think that kind of relationship has really enhanced our ability to keep that promise again of that exceptional learning environment. One of the things that, and go back to the original part of your question, that I think that I've tried to do consistently, particularly over the last several years, is that I think there was an attitude or feeling about Drake that's natural. It's hard to recognize that something that you all grew up around and it's in your backyard is anything but that university in our backyard. And so one of the responsibilities that I've taken on, and that our marketing communications folks have worked hard on over the last several years, is to make sure people recognize there are 472, we're what's called a master's university. There are 472 master's universities in the United States. It's the largest category of four-year institutions in the country, and we're one of the top 5 in the country. And
in what respect?
Academic reputation for academic excellence. Yeah. And
but is this measured by your peers, or?
Yes, it actually comes from the U.S. News and World Report annual college rankings, which have, as I think I've told you before, made a complete hypocrite out of me. I tell people that they're irrelevant, methodologically flawed, and unimportant, but we're ranked at the top, so I brag about it. But 25% of that ranking is something called peer assessment. It used to be called reputation for academic quality. And that comes from a questionnaire that the presidents, the chief academic officer, in our case is the provost, or the vice president for academic affairs, and the head of the admissions operation, in our case Tom's vice president for admissions. We get a questionnaire every spring asking us to rate the other institutions for academic excellence on a scale of 0 to 5. And we have access to the raw data. All institutions do. You can go in and look at the raw data. And out of the 472 institutions in the United States, there are only 3 with a higher reputational score in the academic community than Drake.
And you can take full credit.
Yeah, and those 3 are all in Alaska. And I'm not going to tell you what they are, right? But no, it really
That's
is.
terrific.
It's great, but so part of it has been Des Moines didn't know that, and Des Moines didn't know that over 73% of our students are from out of the state. 61% of our students stay in Central Iowa to work.
So you're a net importer, but
We're a net
most
importer.
colleges in the state are net importers.
Yeah.
University system's a net importer.
Yeah. So I think a big part of it has been making sure that our campus is aware of how important Des Moines is to us, and making sure Des Moines is aware of how important Drake has been to Des Moines for 130 years, and will continue to be.
Let me change the subject again for a minute, and that is, you mentioned your father was a jazz musician. In fact, he was a great jazz musician. When Wynton Marsalis was here for a Bucksbaum lecture, you mentioned your father, and he spoke reverentially of him as a mentor of him, and as a great musician. You clearly have a musical interest, if not bent, and by your admission. How does this fit in? And you've used that to establish a fine music operation at Drake and raise some money almost accidentally.
Yeah.
Almost accidentally for a jazz center or jazz building or anything. How does it all work? How does it all fit together? The jazz, your own interest in blues, Chekhov. You're one of the world's leading experts on Chekhov, and not the pork Chekhov, but how does it all fit together, and how do you keep up on everything? I mean, how does a Renaissance man keep up?
Wow. Well, I appreciate the title. I'm not sure it's accurate, but I don't. And I think that's one of the frustrating things, is that I don't think I could legitimately call myself a Chekhov scholar at this point. I haven't written anything about him in 20 years. Still read him.
So he hasn't written anything of late.
No. He stopped publishing for some mysterious reason in 1903. But I know there's an article in that. If I can figure out why, I will publish on that. And he may be dead.
Whatever happened to Chekhov, right?
Yeah, right.
But really, I mean, you are all these things, and you use all these things very effectively in your work. But how do you keep up? How does somebody with a lot of interest, a lot of these people out here have a lot of interest, how do they manage their time to keep up on everything? And let me add to that, if you're a young person and you went on and you got an MA and you got a PhD, and obviously you needed that for your career, but you didn't know it at the time. If you're a young person and you've graduated, should you try to continue your education, even though you're very happy in your job, you're very happy in your life and everything? Should you try to continue a formal education?
Well, there are two different questions in there.
Yes, at least.
Yeah, at least. And notice that this time, too. So, I don't think you should continue formal education for the purpose of credentials. And unfortunately, I think that's a reason that a lot of people think they have to. I think you can...
Well, let me stop you right there.
Yeah.
You wouldn't probably hire a professor, maybe the world's greatest teacher, but unless that person had the credentials.
That's true. But most people, I'd like to think that most scholars are like most musicians and artists and other people with a passion. And that is that they didn't, it's not a choice. They couldn't help themselves.
Stop me before I get another degree.
Yeah, right. I mean, you're following a passion. And so, and I think that's the key. It's following the passion, or you're in a job that you love and recognize that you can do it better if you learn more. And that learning more may be a degree, it may be a certificate, it may be one course, it may be a mentoring program, but I think just to, unless somebody in your workplace says, you're not going to advance here without an MBA or whatever, but if that's the way they put it, I would think twice about where I'm working. If they say to you, you need to know more about these things in order to be able to do more at this company, then that's a good reason to go do it. But I think solely for credentials or to add to the list is a really bad reason to do it. The farther you go in education, the harder it gets. And you have to be driven by a genuine interest in it, not just to get a diploma or to get those letters. Your first question is another one that I really can't answer with a straight face in front of Madeline, and that's the time, how do you manage all these things? Because I don't. But if I had any advice, is that you have to learn how to do triage, because you literally can't do everything that you want to, and I know I'm going to hear about this later. Why don't you live by your own words, David? You can't do everything that you're asked to do. You can't do everything that you want to, and so how do you decide? Certainly in terms of what I do on the job, I've always struggled with that, because it's very easy in a demanding job to go to work at 7:30 in the morning, work your head off for 12 hours, leave work with a very legitimate sense that you've gotten a tremendous amount accomplished, and none of it was what you were planning to do that day. It was all stuff that happened and that you thought you needed to deal with.
And how much time did you spend on each of those issues? Let's say a day,
Yeah.
a lot of things happen. I mean, is this 3 minutes per issue, or do you have
It
3
depends.
hours?
It depends.
I mean, I
it-
read once where an executive spends roughly 9 minutes on everything that comes before.
Well, I'm an academic, so I spend 50 minutes on everything. And I don't have to finish it. It's the process that's important. And it really depends on what it is, because sometimes something awful will happen, and a student death or some kind of crisis in which just the day's gone. The week may be gone. But I devised a strategy when I first got to, when we completed our first strategic plan at Drake, that actually works. And that is that one of our board members, who was in marketing, had placards made for the board meetings that had the 5 goals of the strategic plan on the placards. And at every board meeting, she wanted us to put them out in front of each person's place at the board table. So I took one and I put it next to my desk, next to my computer screen on my desk. And that's my metric for triage, that when I look at the pile on my desk and have to make decisions about what I'm going to pay attention to, a big part of the answer is which ones of these things are going to get the university closer to that stuff. And that's very helpful, because you really end up with several piles. You end up with the pile that's really urgent, you have to do it. You end up with a pile that's really important but can be done next. You've got a pile that says, I'll get to this when I can. Then you've got a pile that says, I'm going to give this to somebody else to do. And then you've got a pile that says, this is not going to get done.
Is that why you never return my phone calls?
Yeah. Actually, yours goes into, I also found a very effective strategy all the way back when I was a dean at Tufts. I have this red folder, and it says urgent on it. And I put stuff in it, and I don't look at it for 3 months. And then by that time, it's too late to do
Taking care of itself,
and
right.
It's all taken care of.
If I were sitting here with Sally Mason or Greg Joffrey or Ben Allen, the presidents of the 3 Regents universities, and I asked them how much time they spent on raising money, they would all probably say between 50 and 60% of their time. How much time do you spend raising money?
Right now, I spend 60 to 70% of my time because we're in the middle of a campaign.
And do you enjoy it?
Yeah, I do. And by spending 60 or 70% of my time, that includes the meetings in the office about the planning for the campaign, et cetera. It's not all just on the road. I do enjoy it for Drake. I don't know that I would be a good. It's easy to be a good to raise money for Drake when what you're doing really is trying to find the connection between what Drake needs and somebody's passion. And Fred's a great example of that. But we had, Maddie and I have some close friends that he's just finishing up a term.
You just said, and Fred's a great example of that. I know who Fred is, but
Yeah.
I think there's some people out here who don't know. Are you going to tell them, or are you just going to
I'll tell you this in
our
a
little
minute.
secret?
I'll tell you in a minute. But we have some good friends that he just finished his a 5-year term as the provost at Brown, and she's somebody Maddie grew up with. And last summer we were having dinner, and she asked me, how much? So you're in a campaign, how much time do you spend fundraising? And I said, by board mandate, I'm spending 65, 70% of my time. And she said, do you enjoy spending that much time talking about money? And I said, it's hardly ever a conversation about money. It's a conversation about what they care about and a conversation about Drake. And I said, it ends up at money, but most of the conversation is not about money. Most of the conversation is about their experiences at Drake and their passions and what they care about and what's going on at Drake. And that's a conversation that both they and I love to have. So it's.
But do you
it's
ever
fun.
say, oh, this is just the most boring son of a bitch I've ever talked to in my life? Other than right now.
Yeah, you knew this was coming, didn't you? I was going to say just in your office, but it's. Diane Callbeck was the associate VP for alumni development, and I had a luncheon with a couple years ago, early on in my tenure here, and I won't go into any more detail.
Well, tell us their names.
Oh, that I can't remember. I'm too old, but it was 10 years ago or so, and it was somewhere in the Southwest. I don't remember whether it was Phoenix or Tucson or whatever. But it just halfway through the luncheon, we had to stop making eye contact because one of us was going to burst out laughing. It was just deadly. It was excruciating. But then I just kept remembering that I got a free car for doing this, and so I just kept plugging away. But no, most of the time it's.
But wait, did they give any money?
Not that I would call money. No. I think they paid for lunch.
But made a pledge in the high two figures.
Yes, yeah, right. But it is very, first of all, I'm not walking into these conversations blind. By the time I'm talking to somebody about doing something for Drake and the campaign, number one, these people are smart enough to know why the president wants to come talk to them. Number two, I've probably known them for years. You don't just meet somebody for the first time and say, "Can I have all your money?" So that by the time we have these conversations, they're very rarely difficult. It's really more an enjoyable conversation. And Fred's a great example. Fred is Fred Turner, who's the retired CEO of McDonald's. And it took me 8 years to get in his office. He just kept canceling appointments, and he knew I was coming.
And he's a Drake graduate.
He's an alum. He flunked out. Still loves Drake. He really does. And I'm not revealing family secrets. He talks about it in his autobiography. And
how many people have read that?
But we were.
Where's that on the Google on the Amazon bestseller list?
Yeah.
Anyway.
So Diane Callbeck and I were meeting with Fred, and we were talking about the campaign. And I'll give you the very short version of it because it's a very long conversation. But he was clearly bored by this, and in the middle of it, he said, he just completely changed the subject. He said, I have this big party every fall. They call it the Fred Party. I said, I invite 300 or 400 of my closest friends from around the world. And I bring in some of my favorite jazz bands from around the country, and we have this big party. He said, you should have heard the band we had this fall. I said, I've got a friend who's the best studio piano player in Chicago. He got this guy who was the trumpet player who took Harry James's place in Benny Goodman Band. I said, really? Who's that? Thinking my father's been dead for 4 years. And I said, who's that? And he gave me the name, and I said, Fred, he didn't take Harry James's place. He took the place of the guy who took Harry James's place. And Fred said, how the hell do you know that? And I told him how I knew, because my father took Harry James's place in the Benny Goodman Band. And I can't repeat in this. Just suffice it to say that Fred's response was 2 words, and the first one was no, right? And off we went with Fred grilling me about growing up around Count Basie and Duke Ellington and all these folks. And then he said, gotta go. Make another appointment to come see me. And I looked at him and I said, it took me 8 years to get in here, Fred. I'm not leaving. And he said, no, I'm serious. And we went out to his assistant. We made an appointment. He said, I have a doctor's appointment. We made an appointment to come back 2 weeks
You said,
later.
I'm a doctor.
Yeah, right. I don't think I wanted to do the exam, though. And so we came back in 2 weeks, and we brought him 3 CDs from the Drake Jazz Program and one of my father's CDs, and he was just thrilled. We talked a little bit more about the business school, and his eyes are rolling again. And I said, Fred, you really love big band jazz, don't you? He said, yeah. And I said, are you worried it's going to die out because the younger generation doesn't care about it? And he said, yeah. I said, how'd you like to help us make sure that doesn't happen? I said, wait till you listen to those CDs. And, oh, I should say at the beginning, he'd already told me, he said, I already thought I knew what I wanted to do for Drake. And the first thing he said was, he says, what do you want me to do for the campaign? I said, I don't know yet. I don't know what you care about. This isn't the first visit. And he said, oh, it doesn't matter what I care about. And I said, yeah, it really does. And that came around full circle in a wonderful way. Um, so at any rate, we asked him if he'd told us he was thinking about a $500,000 gift. And before we got into talking about the jazz program, and I said, well, how'd you like to endow a professorship in jazz studies? And he said, how much is that going to cost me? And I said, a minimum of $1 million. And he said, I was thinking about $500,000. And he said, yeah, but you weren't thinking about jazz.
Yeah, there's no half a professorship.
Yeah, and so the check was in the bank a week later. And then he featured the Drake Jazz Band, Jazz One, at the next Fred party. And he fell in love with the kids. He talks to Andy Klassen, the holder of his Fred and Patty Turner chair. He talks to Andy on his cell phone once a week. He calls Maddie and me regularly. He adores the kids. The students adore him. He brought them back again last fall. So after the first Fred party, Andy and I went back to him and said, how'd you like to, these kids are rehearsing in a former laundromat, and it's falling down, and we've got this great possibility of building something for a comparatively small amount of money, $1.5 million, because the foundation was already there. It was on what's called a plinth, which you may know is Greek for we ran out of money before we finished this part. And who knew? And it was just sort of on the north end of the Fine Arts Center, but it meant there was a foundation, a flooring, and all the mechanicals. So he agreed to do that. And as I was leaving, I looked at him and said, and this is where the fundraising really gets to be fun. I said, do you remember when you said it didn't matter what you gave us money for? And he said, yeah. I said, really matters, doesn't it? I mean, here's a guy who's in his late 70s. He's a widower.
But he gave the money for the...
He gave the money for the center. So he's given us $2.5 million in total for the jazz program. But it has become a huge part of his life, too. So it really did matter.
As well as an important part for Des Moines and for Drake.
Yeah. And that's the perfect match when you can do something like that. When somebody... Maddie and I had dinner last night with a couple who've endowed the cello position at Drake. And they live in San Diego, and they come back to Des Moines a couple of times a year. And we had dinner with them and the young woman and her husband who holds the endowed position in cello. And to see that kind of synergy where the donors it enriches their lives in ways that are important to them at the same time that it's enriching the university. That's when it's really fun, and it happens a lot.
There's just a few minutes left, and we always invite the audience to ask questions. I ran longer than I usually do because you talk so much, but...
Note that it took him 50 minutes to get his first shot at me. I was predicting 3, so...
The over-under was 3. Does anybody have any questions for President Maxwell? Yes, there are some.
Turn it on. Hi, I graduated from Drake and
It's on.
somewhere. I know. That's why I didn't tell you, so you wouldn't know what year I graduated. See, it was a joke. Oh, ha ha. And at that time, I thought that within 15 years, I would have graduated from a defunct university. And that hasn't happened. And it's grown, and I live in Des Moines. I've lived in Des Moines all my life, and I've seen the efforts pay off. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. That's terrific.
That'd be a good name for a school, wouldn't it? Defunct University.
Yeah.
No alumni.
I think there are a lot of them, actually.
Yeah.
Hi, in today's economy, it's way interesting as far as jobs and businesses and things like that go. It seems like colleges used to, and universities used to more prepare people to get jobs. Is there anything Drake's doing differently as far as maybe preparing students to run a business or something like that so that they can make themselves more marketable rather than just be able to get a job?
Okay, do I have an hour to
That
answer
was
this?
multiple questions.
That's a great question. Let me give you just 2 quick responses because I know we're getting close to running out of time. First of all, in a broad sense, one of the distinctive characteristics of Drake University is a very deliberate integration of the best of liberal arts and sciences education with preparation for the world of practice, with preparation for careers. And we do that with something called the Drake curriculum. It's a formal term, capital D, capital C, which is a set of requirements for all students regardless of major, which school or college they're in, which means that we're graduating students who are both well-educated and broadly educated, but prepared for the world of practice. And Des Moines is a huge asset in that regard. Roughly 80% of our students do at least one internship, and it's a very powerful way of helping them learn how to take what they've learned in the classroom and the laboratory and apply it to real world issues. But it is a very conscious focus, and I think for those of you who are employers in the Des Moines area, we hear consistently from people who hired Drake students as interns and Drake graduates that, wow, they're fresh out of school, they know how to do things. they can take what they know and use it to do things. And so it's a very deliberate focus of the way in which we do education at Drake. In terms of the specifics, the latter part of your question, we actually have an entrepreneurial concentration now in the College of Business for students who are interested in that particular track. But we pride ourselves in the fact that we graduate people who are ready to take what they know and do good and important things with it.
Is there a question back there? Someplace? I saw another question someplace. Yes.
What's the role of athletics at Drake in specific and in colleges in general?
Well, I think I can say with some degree of conviction that the role of athletics at Drake is significantly different than that of most Division I schools like Miami or Ohio State.
Just to pick two at random?
Just to pick two at random. But seriously, we are really distinctive in the sense that if you look at our athletic strategic plan, and I think you can, I think it's on the website, I would guess that it's the only Division I athletic strategic plan in the country that talks about intercollegiate sport as one of the ways in which we meet the mission learning outcomes of the university. It is truly remarkable, and I don't think any other institution does that. We really look at our students' participation in athletics as, when we talk about preparing students for meaningful, personalized, professional accomplishment and responsible global citizenship, which is the kind of triptych of our mission statement, that we recognize that the kinds of habits of mind and skills and perspectives and knowledge bases that you need in order to fulfill that promise, that participation in athletics, particularly intercollegiate athletics, is an important and very productive way of developing a lot of those skills. So we are very fortunate in that we are able to say that everybody, say to a student athlete or a prospective student athlete, that everybody on campus is there for the same reason. We don't have a cultural divide between the faculty and the athletics department. Everybody is here for you to fulfill your dreams, for you to figure out what your dream for yourself is and to live it. And that if you're not performing well in the classroom, the coach is going to pull you off the floor or the field because it's a partnership. And so I think we really are distinctive in that regard.
I never heard you use the two words "win games."
I'm getting there.
Okay.
I'm getting there. And I have this I'm on the tour for a lot of the recruits, particularly the men's and women's basketball and some of the other teams. I talk to the recruits when they're on campus, and after talking about it in the way that I just have, I tell them that it's not that we don't want to win championships. We do want to. I would love to see us win every championship in the Missouri Valley every year and go to the NCAAs, but not for the typical reasons that most college presidents do. I don't want it for bragging rights, although when we beat Butler on national television, I did call Bobby Fong and gloat. And the people who say to us, oh, you wouldn't believe how much more money you'll get from alumni if you win the Missouri Valley. Well, we did 4 years ago, and I know how much more. That's not why you invest in sports. The reason that I want us to win championships, that we want us to win championships, goes back to the comment I made before. Our role at Drake really is to help students figure out what their dreams for themselves are and set them off on the path to realize those dreams. Well, a talented, gifted athlete has been dreaming about winning championships since she was 5 years old. They want to excel at what they do. So the reason we want to win championships is because I've been on the floor when our men's and women's teams have won championships, and I see the look on their faces, and their dreams came true. And that's why we want to win championships. And so we want to win championships as badly as anybody else does, but it's for them, not for us. It's for the student athletes.
We're almost out of time, but you've got plenty of time. If you're going to live till 97, what's your dream?
What's my dream? To find time to continue in this job while being a 777 pilot and playing guitar like Eric Clapton.
That's good. That's good. There was one question from, yes.
Yeah.
My brief question is, I like what you talked about earlier about not having to get those letters. Some people should actually get them.
If you hang on 1 second, start into the microphone again because it's being recorded.
My question is, and I like what you said earlier about getting those letters just to get letters, because somebody said you got to get letters. In today's business world, everybody seems to have letters in order to get the job. And yet with the cost of education and looking at wage scale today, realistically going forward, what do you think needs to change so those balance out in a much more level balanced situation so that the student can pay the loan and make a living and move forward in life?
Wow, that's a terrific question, and one that deserves a much longer answer than I've got time for. One very significant thing happened in regard to student loans a year ago last January, and we seem to have the federal government seems to have done a wonderful job of keeping it a secret, because I find that people don't know about it. But the Department of Education actually passed a reg that limits federal loan repayment to 10% of your net income for life. So all of a sudden, you don't have to worry as much about, at least for
Federal loans.
Federal loans, yeah. Now, banks, et cetera, are a different story. But one of the real tragedies of college costs and of loan burdens is that students are making career choices based on predicted earnings, because if they did what they really wanted to do, such as teach school, they wouldn't make enough to pay off their college loans. Let me just say in closing that I think it's part of a much bigger issue. There's no question that college costs have been out of control. Colleges have charged more and more for the last couple of decades because they could. And I do need to get in the institutional bragging point that the average tuition increase at private institutions over the last decade is 6.3%, and at Drake it's 4.3%. So we've been doing everything we can. But one of the things that has happened is that the view of education in America, both on the part of the public and on the part of policymakers, over the last 10 or 15 years has shifted from higher education being a public good to a private good. We are a country that, with the Morrill Act in 1863, in the middle of the Civil War, created Iowa and Iowa State, the public universities, because there was this recognition that the growth of America as the industrial age opened up needed educated people. We needed educated people for the health of the country. The GI Bill after World War II, that we needed these men and women coming back from war. We needed them to be educated. I went to graduate school for free on a National Defense Education Act fellowship because the country decided it needed people who were specialists in Russian. Education was seen as a public good. The United States needed people with a higher education. Over the last 10 or 15 years, both in public policy at the state and the federal level, and I think in public attitudes as well, it has shifted to being seen as a private good. You're the one who's going to benefit from it. You're going to get a good job. You're going to make a lot of money, so you pay for it. And you see the drastic reduction in public support of state universities even before the financial crisis. You see it in the threats for the Perkins loans and Pell Grants in the Congress. It's sort of shifting the burden. So all kinds of things have to change. Colleges and universities have to do a better job of controlling costs. We have to do, at Drake, we're working we spent $49 million of our own money on scholarships this past year. And that's not enough. That's all we had. And so a big part of our fundraising campaign is to raise more funds for scholarships. But at the same time, I think the public, in the form of state and national federal governments, have to get back to taking on more of that responsibility of looking for ways to, if President Obama wants to double the number of people with college degrees by 2020, it has to be a national effort that involves everyone from the policymakers and the governments through the institutions.
David, thank you very much. I'd like to thank again the principal people for allowing the use of this room, and the Downtown Chamber and the partnership for organizing all this, but especially to David for coming here and sitting for an hour, and thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm so enjoyed it.